in a plug for the webinar series that Future West is doing. Their first one dealt with impacts of development on wildlife habitat and some of the tools associated with mitigating those impacts. The next one is how do patterns of growth affect our wallets? And that's really could be a good lead into our next webinar, which is dealing with taxpayer supported infrastructure. So I'll point you to, you can register for their webinars and also see the list of their webinar series on their webpage. And now I'd like to introduce Randy and Dennis. Both have spent many years working in the Northern Rockies, helping to understand the challenges with growth and change. And Randy and Dennis are not strangers to Red Lodge. As part of the Sonoran Institute, they partnered with Beartooth Front Community Forum in its early days in the mid-1990s to guide community forums addressing concerns about the effects of growth on the community. And that one of the outcomes of that effort was the 1995 Red Lodge Master Plan, which I believe is one of the first completed for a small town in Montana. So without, I'll turn it over to Randy and Dennis to go ahead with their presentation.
Great. Let Randy put the opening slide up. So thank you, Jeff, and hello, everybody. It's so good to see you all virtually. I wish we were there in person, but this is the new normal, I guess. So I'm Dennis Glick, the director of Future West, and I can't tell you what a treat it is for us to be with you this evening, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But a little bit about Future West. We are a nonprofit. We're based in Bozeman, but we work around the Northern Rockies region. Our mission is to help communities identify and create the future that they want. We attempt to do that by providing key decision makers, people like local officials, community leaders, community activists like yourselves, with the information, training, technical assistance, and facilitation needed to make wise decisions on a wide array of conservation, development, and growth issues. We've been in existence for a dozen years, but as Jeff said, we've been working on this stuff for a long time. And you know, during that period, I just have to say one of my fondest memories, 30 years of working on this stuff, was meeting with a little group of Red Lodge residents in the back room of a restaurant on Main Street in the early 1990s. And we were there to talk about the possibility of helping to facilitate a gathering of Red Lodge residents for what we were describing as a successful communities dialogue. And that event was eventually facilitated by Luther Probst, who was the director of the Sonoran Institute. And it was a coming together of the community. Some of you watching this may have been there, but it was a coming together of the community to identify shared values. You know, what is it about Red Lodge that people really wanted to preserve, and what did they want to change? And most importantly, what actions would be needed to move forward in achieving that shared vision for the future. It's also the genesis of the Beartooth Front Community Forum. And you know better than I do, the rest is history. And the Beartooth Front Community Forum really has had a storied history. And, we really wanted you to know that, and I mean this in all sincerity, that the Beartooth Front Community Forum has really inspired and informed our work. And, truth be told, if you guys had a quarter or even a dime for every time Randy and I have told the story of the Beartooth Front Community Forum in other places, and how important it is to have a permanent entity that's watchdogging and engaging in community planning and development issues. If you had a quarter for every time we mention your name, you could hire a full-time coordinator, or better yet, throw a really good party. So we thank you for your vision and your commitment, and most of all, your tenacity. 30 years is a really long time, because it's not only had I think a really significant impact on your community, it's actually had an impact and inspired people around the region. So thank you so much, and know that we're honored and excited to be part of this new initiative that you're undertaking. So on that note, I'd like to hand the reins over to my colleague, Randy Carpenter. And as Jeff said, I think Randy's going to speak for about a half hour, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Randy, why don't you take it away?
Okay, everybody hear me? Thumbs up? Okay. So, I guess second everything that Dennis just said. I wish we could be there. I love going to Red Lodge. What a cool community you guys have. It was, well, I guess about 10 years ago that Luther Probst and I spoke at your 20th birthday party. And it was fantastic spending time in Red Lodge then, as usual. Just appreciate the invite. And I'll take you through the presentation here real quickly. So what I'm going to talk about is growth trends. Next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to try and run right through all this stuff. The impacts of low density, far-flung, sprawling growth on a community, not just Red Lodge, and then what we think are some keys for planning for future growth. So first with growth trends, so you can see an increasing amount of growth over the past 30 years has been happening outside of the towns in Carbon County. This is always like the first data I look at when I'm trying to understand land development patterns in an area, because trends like these cause real challenges, if nothing else, than in the amount of land that gets paved over, because an average rural lot covers about the same amount of land as a whole city block. So you can imagine over time, if the proportion of growth is shifting towards rural areas, you're just using up a lot more land over time. Fortunately, that trend seems to have leveled off since 2010. I should note that these numbers I'm showing you here are population numbers. This is from the Census Bureau. It's current to 2019, July 2019, but I do have some more recent data that I can show you. And that is here. Housing starts in Red Lodge. That leveling off of that trend towards county growth seems to be largely due to an increase in development in Red Lodge. I assume that, like most cool towns, especially in this past COVID year, you all would be seeing an uptick in development, but I was pretty taken aback by these housing permit numbers. I suppose I shouldn't have been, though. You're all such an attractive place to live. And you got public lands right out your doorstep. I'd say second to none in the Northern Rockies. You got this cool downtown, ski hill right outside of town. So you're seeing growth, and it wouldn't surprise me if you're going to see quite a bit more. But still, rural areas in Carbon County have also seen quite a bit of development in the past year. According to this data, more than in Red Lodge. So these numbers are based on septic permits for the rural areas and housing building permits for Red Lodge. Don't have data for for all the areas previous to 2020. But if you look at 2020 alone on the far right, you can see new homes permitted in Red Lodge, the red bar, the area surrounding Red Lodge, that sort of pink bar, the Joliet and Bridger areas in tan and green, and the county in it orange, and then all homes combined, city and county in purple. So it appears then that city county ratio, and we'll have to wait till we get definitive numbers, but it appears that it's remaining about the same. But again, that's better than what it had been doing. So why is this important? Why are these development patterns important? Why is it important where you grow and how you grow? Well, first, spread out growth creates real stress on services and therefore tax rates. Either your services got to go down or your taxes have to go up when you're stressed. In spread out growth, emergency crews and sheriff's deputies have more ground to cover. There are more roads to build and maintain. I'd refer back to a study that we did when we were at the Sonoran Institute that showed that more compact growth patterns in the Gallatin Valley would save over $50 million in tax dollars in just 15 years. But costs aren't the only factor in local government services and taxes. The other side of the coin is revenues. So the numbers I'm going to show here come from a study called About Town, done by the analyst that Jeff mentioned earlier, Joe Minicozy. We had commissioned this when we were at the Sonoran Institute, this study called About Town. The numbers are from 9 communities in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and Colorado, and show that on a per acre basis, compact in-town development generates many times more revenues for local governments than does rural development. Those numbers on those bar charts are for Bozeman. So you see that on a per acre basis, county residential at 825, city residential at 4,007, and these are in property taxes. Single use commercial is almost $9,000 an acre. But then you get into mixed use and going vertically. So 2-story mixed use, like in a downtown, is over $32,000 an acre. And 3-story mixed use is almost $45,000 an acre. So just taking a specific example, the 2-acre block in downtown Bozeman, where our office is located, where the Bozeman Hotel is, generates almost as many property tax revenues as does the 20-acre Walmart site in town. And then here's an image that shows the per acre property tax revenues generated in all of Bozeman, with the taller spikes being more tax revenues per acre. As you might have guessed, the big purple spike there is downtown Bozeman. And just another plug, as Jeff mentioned, that Joe Minicozy will be doing a webinar for us on this very subject on April 14th. Joe is a master storyteller, great graphics. He's a really funny guy, but it's an incredibly important story. So if you can, really please do join us. And we'll be recording that as well. Then in terms of agriculture, the more that development spreads out, the more agricultural land's taken out of production. And ag is not only an important economic contributor for Carbon County, but it's such a crucial part of the landscape and of the culture of the area, and it provides wildlife habitat. And local ag is also growing in importance. The shot from your farmer's market demonstrates just that. Low density, far-flung development also contributes to the increasing housing affordability challenges that literally every growing place in Montana is experiencing. I don't know one that isn't. We're working in Deer Lodge right now. That's not even a growing place. It's actually losing population up until the past year or so. And they really have housing problems there. But by growing a more compact manner with smaller homes on smaller lots, as you see this new small home development in Missoula there on the upper left, or missing middle housing has become a new buzzword for good reason. It's the idea that, and too often, the choices come down to either doing single family residential or living in apartments, but duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, bungalow courts, townhouses, all these things, and some people call them general density, are really crucial. And by growing in a more compact manner and being able to offer more housing choices, you'll offer more affordability. And then there's issues of water quality and quantity. So when growth out in the countryside, we risk water quality and quantity. Rural septic systems just can't do as good a job as cleaning wastewater, residential wastewater, as modern state-of-the-art municipal systems do. There's a huge difference. And cumulatively, that starts to impact our water, groundwater and surface water areas. And also irrigating, very large lots just takes more water than does town lots. And sprawling growth also affects wildlife. Valley floors are crucial ground for so many critters. They need it for wintering range, for calving areas, as corridors to move from one core area, habitat area to another. And wildlife habituate to subdivisions. Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks says that rural development is the #1 wildlife management challenge that they face. And when growth spreads farther out, our communities become more and more auto dependent. That means that other ways of getting around in the future, like biking and transit, are compromised. And when homes are farther apart, a good transit system just not feasible. And you just can't do effective active transportation, biking and walking, as is called for in your active transportation plan, which, by the way, is very good. Finally, the Red Lodge community, of course, has stated a commitment to sustainability. It's great and very important to promote alternative energy sources like you all have done. I took this photo from the city's sustainability page, but it's crucial to recognize that typically about 90% of a community's greenhouse gas emissions stem from transportation and buildings. And when growth is happening in towns, people drive less and they usually have smaller homes. And that's especially true for attached homes like duplexes and fourplexes in apartments. Turns out that sharing walls creates huge energy savings. So a number of years ago, when Dennis and I were at the Sonoran Institute, we published a book called The Hallmarks of Successful Communities. And I'm just gonna, quickly go through these right here. So one is developing a common understanding that data and analysis in terms that laypersons can understand, not just engineers and planners, of community challenges and opportunities. Then once that information's out there and there's a shared understanding of the situation in the community and its trends, engage more residents in discussions about the community's future. This isn't just feel good civics lesson here. In our experience, the more people are meaningfully engaged, the better your plans are and the better the outcomes are. And in that, you can develop a widely shared vision for the future of the community. And then finally develop, realistic, achievable practical action plans that have buy-in from people. So here are what I think are the keys for planning for the future of the Red Lodge area that will keep it a great place. First, you need to think and plan as a region. It's just absolutely crucial that the communities of Carbon County, local governments in Carbon County, especially Red Lodge and city government and county government, work together to plan for future growth patterns, and really to enact what your growth policies say again and again in both the county growth policy and the city growth policy. It calls for, most growth should occur in our towns to keep agricultural lands and open spaces and range lands intact, like that graphic indicates. And decide where you want to grow. And again, the city and the county need to come together to decide that, which again, that should be pretty easy, really, because you've identified the general principles. Again, both the city and county growth policies, that is the growth policies of that big picture, long range vision of what you want your community to look like. Those growth policies, state that growth should first happen in towns. In Gallatin County, the cities of Bozeman and Belgrade and the county decided to do that and plan for the core of the Gallatin Valley, that area between Bozeman and Belgrade in this unincorporated area called Four Corners, called the Triangle area. That effort was driven by future growth scenarios that we did back then at Sonoran Institute, using a program called Envision Tomorrow that compared two land use patterns. This scenario for the Triangle area is called the status quo area. That's, how the valley had been growing, just really spread out. And of course, that status quo scenario showed that would result in much greater area of land developed and open space and habitat paved over, and greater infrastructure and services costs. And this future growth scenario, the fiscally efficient scenario. So the county and those two cities have come together, decided that they need to enact plans to help make this happen. I think that's really important that you all do that. Between Carbon County in Red Lodge. And there's a lot of land that could be developed in the area and in the town of Red Lodge. This map shows undeveloped lots within Red Lodge. There's some 300 acres of lots that are vacant, enough for quite a few years of development. And not all of those parcels are zoned residential, and some of them are, on steep hillsides and would be less developable. But it appeared that you'd have a long time, you'd go a long time without doing a new subdivision. Now this map here shows vacant parcels in Red Lodge and within a mile of the city boundary. There are some 7,000 acres of land, vacant parcels. And again, that doesn't mean that they're all developable. Some might use for commercial, but there's a lot of land in both areas, in Red Lodge and in the city, or out in the county, that are developable. So it's you guys have some work to do if you want to come together and decide where specifically growth would best occur. So I just want to give you a sense or an example of the results of incrementally shifting to more town growth. So if you were to return to more traditional patterns in Carbon County, where about 50% of the growth is in towns, rather than around the 39% you've been seeing recently, as I showed earlier, in just the next 10 years, that shift would result in about 200 fewer acres of land being paved over. Again, as I noted that, an average rural lot takes up about the same amount of space as like, a whole city block or 8 to 10 lots in town. That's the equivalent of 150 football fields just by, again, an incremental shift to town development. So, we're not suggesting you have to do this revolutionary thing where all growth has to happen in town, because, people are always going to want to live in rural areas. That's okay. But it really does come down to the math in the long run. Then, making it easier to grow in town versus rural areas, unfortunately, and this isn't just Carbon County and Red Lodge, in most places, we just make it easier and cheaper to grow in rural areas, the areas where we say we really shouldn't grow, which is, it's unfortunate. So once again, it's going to be absolutely crucial for the city and county to work together. Again, both growth policies call for planning coordination and coming together to come to an agreement on growth on the cities of border, especially in regard to annexation policies. That's, absolutely needed. And then learning from the past and building great neighborhoods. I had a chance to, look at your zoning ordinance and your subdivision regulations in Red Lodge and development regulations in the county. And, your zoning ordinance isn't bad at all, but I think that there are some real improvements that you could make when you do update your zoning ordinance, which I hope you do. I think it's out of date, and you now have your growth policy done, which gives you the direction, for how you update your zoning ordinance. And in fact, by state law, your zoning ordinances and that growth policy, must be in harmony. Okay. Then, of course, housing, especially in a place like Red Lodge, is a real challenge. There's no silver bullet to this progress. So I think you have to use a variety of tools. I think that your Red Lodge housing needs assessment from 2016 could be updated. It's an important document, but a lot has changed since then. And even when you have your zoning in place, for instance, in Red Lodge, in most of your zoning districts, it's like you can do pretty small lot development, 5,000 square foot development, but a lot of the new development is not that. Even though they could do it smaller, they're doing much larger lots. And some of that, the way to address that is to show developers what the market is exactly for new housing in the future. You do that through a housing needs assessment. I think bringing in new partners, between, of course, the Red Lodge Area Community Foundation, which is leading this up, but also the city and the RC&D and businesses and other nonprofits have a role. In Bozeman now, we're actually forming or I should say Gallatin County, not Bozeman. Gallatin County, we're forming a regional housing council designed to do just that. Bring in, the city of Red Lodge can't solve this alone, and the community foundation can't solve this alone. You need private sector, you need employers, you need other nonprofits to understand housing needs and to be at the table. So I think that's really crucial to bring them into into this coalition, this workforce housing committee, and adequately funded. These are complex challenges, and it's really hard to understand these things and come to realistic, achievable solutions on a shoestring. So I'd urge you to fund the work of bringing these partners together. I consider a community land trust. That's something we're doing in Gallatin County as well. I happen to sit on the board of our new Headwaters Community Housing Trust that will acquire land and hold it in perpetuity. And then when people build homes on that land, they own just the home. And you take the land costs off the table. And then when they go to sell, they can achieve some appreciation because housing prices, of course, are going up. But they can only achieve, we limit that appreciation to like 3% annual appreciation. So it permanently keeps housing affordable. Anyway, that's the idea. I see that you have an opportunity zone in Red Lodge. That's fantastic. It gives incentives to developers to build more affordable housing. That's, it's fantastic news. I wish that more places could take advantage of that. And then, I think you should look at graduated impact fees. That would be, each home has to pay an impact fee. That's an impact on the water and wastewater system, taking up the capacity of the water and wastewater system. But maybe if they were waived or at least graduated for more affordable housing, that would be helpful. And finally, I'll say this: I am not going to wade into the politics of short-term rentals, but I would say your zoning ordinance allows short-term rentals as a permitted use, not even a conditional use, but a permitted use in every single zoning district in the community. And I'm not getting into the politics of it, but every time a rental, long-term rental turns into a short-term rental, your housing just gets less affordable. I would really urge you to take a look at that. So, those are the keys that we think keeping Red Lodge a special place that doesn't turn into a place like the Teton Valley here of Idaho, and remains, these compact, really attractive community like we have here. I think it's in the Gallatin Valley. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah, well, maybe we can jump right into the questions, and I had a few closing remarks, but we'll start with the questions first.
Sorry, I just had to take a second to unmute. Yep, we do have a couple, and for people maybe came in a bit late, if you do have questions, you can pop them into the chat box and I'll read them out. So we have one from Amy Highfield. She says, agreed that working with more partners, especially county and city governments, are important to work on growth challenges regionally. But how do we pay for that work?
Well, okay, so I'm going to say one more thing that I'm not going to, about not wading into the politics of this, but I think you guys are staring down the barrel of a lot of change. I mentioned earlier, the recreational opportunities, the downtown, the ski area, every place we know of in the West like this has eventually been really challenged, if not inundated, by growth. And you can save money by trying to do planning on the cheap, but I would urge you not to do that. It's only going to cost you more in the long run. So how do you pay for it? You make it you make room for it in the budget. Police and fire are incredibly important. And if your house is on fire, or if you need help, you want a great emergency services system, and you have one there. You spend about $1 million a year on that, and spending some tens of thousands of dollars on planning, I think, is going to be a great return on investment for you all.
And I have another question. Well, more of a comment from Steve Simonson from Beartooth RC&D. He would be able to give more information about opportunity zones. And then Amy asks, from what I understand, the county contracts out planning. Is that typical?
Yeah, it often is. I'll just say here, as Dennis knows, my nighttime job is is a contract planner for the town of Three Forks in Manhattan here. So that's not unusual in smaller places.
And I've got one from Ken. You mentioned that communities need to plan regionally. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. For instance, you're on the edge, the land on the edge of Red Lodge. It can either, it's in the county, it's unincorporated, it's under county jurisdiction. But let's say a developer comes in and says, you know, I'm interested in buying that land and developing it. You really ought to have agreements into place about what happens. For instance, in most communities, it would be that if the county would say, look, go to the city first. If the city can provide services and infrastructure, especially water and sewer, then you should, that's where you should develop. We don't want to approve a subdivision out here. Or perhaps it's within a certain area, a few miles of a community, and there's an agreement that says, yeah, it doesn't have to be annexed because it's not adjacent. You must be abutting to the community, but you should follow the town's subdivision regulations. So when the town does get out there, that subdivision's design is in harmony with county growth.
Can I weigh in on that just quickly? Future West has hosted a couple of conferences titled Sustaining the New West. And in those conferences, we decided to sort of come out of the closet on the issue of regional planning. It's almost been taboo to talk about that in the rural West, like it's a United Nations plot. But I live in Livingston, and we are living next to one of the fastest growing places in the United States, Gallatin County. It's spilling over into our community, and it's affecting everything from housing affordability to open space to our transportation systems. And it just seems to us that we need to really realize that thinking about everything from affordable housing to wildlife migrations to open space conservation to community development, we really need to start thinking and planning regionally. And I know that, you know, you're right next door to Yellowstone County and Billings. I think every weekend you probably see a lot of spillover from that area onto the ski hill. But I think Randy's right. I think it's a really good question to ask. But my hope for this region is that we do start thinking more and planning more on a regional scale. I don't think we're going to solve these problems unless we do that.
Thanks, Dennis. I've got a good question from Jeff. So he says, you mentioned the City Gallatin partnership. It appeared the use of future growth scenarios helped stimulate the need for better county community coordination. How difficult is it to generate future growth scenarios, and what is that cost?
Yeah, well, the Envision Tomorrow is a GIS-based program that, you know, it has a fairly significant learning curve. It's not complicated once you get into it, because literally, you know, it's the learning curve is in setting it up. The way it works is the user or a group of users together literally has a palette on a computer, and they just paint in different colors that represent different types of development, low density residential, high density commercial, whatever, onto a map of the community, and it automatically generates things like carbon emissions for that scenario you just created, or you know, the miles of roads required, or the infrastructure costs. So for the user, it's pretty easy to set it up. You know, it takes a learning curve. We can do that. We've got a guy who's an expert. One of our Future West associates is an expert at Envision Tomorrow. So if you're interested in doing that, get a hold of us and we can talk about it.
Thank you. I've got a question from Hope Smith. Can you address the value of an airport to a community?
Well, certainly it's had an incredibly important impact on Bozeman, the state's busiest airport, and Headwaters Economics have been saying for years that airports are one of the keys for generating economic development. In terms of the importance to a smaller community with, mostly non-commercial traffic, I really couldn't tell you. But maybe Steve at RC&D can help you out with that.
Yeah, and I think Steve is on the line today. Steve, would you want to unmute and speak to that at all?
Sure, thanks, Robin. Yeah, the airports are a vital link for economic and community development activities. We're seeing probably more of an affluent group of travelers coming into communities in Red Lodge that are using private air service instead of commercial airports going into Billings. But there's a significant amount of traffic that's flowing commercially into Billings and then coming to Red Lodge and Carbon County for recreational and other opportunities.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. I have a question. So the City of Red Lodge Planning Board is updating the zoning regulations now. How can members of the public get involved with these updates?
Maybe that's a question for a member of the planning board.
I know at least Jeff is here.
Yeah.
I could address that a little bit. Yeah, the Red Lodge Planning Board is right now going through and reviewing the Red Lodge zoning regulations and in bringing them into compliance with our updated growth policy that Red Lodge just completed last fall. And those meetings are open to the public. We typically have 2 meetings each month. It's usually the second Wednesday of the month and the last Wednesday of the month. They start at 5:30, go from 5:30 to 7. And anybody is welcome to join in and participate in those discussions and bring ideas forward for the planning board to consider.
I would just add, in Livingston, we're in the process of updating our growth policy. And the planning board, the city planning board meets every other week. And the local NGO conservation community has identified that as a really high priority focus for their work. So they've been doing a really good job of alerting their members to when these meetings are going to occur, how to join the meetings, what the issues are. They've coupled that outreach with doing exactly what you're doing, informational webinars. And I have to tell you, it's a really neat story of the planning board receiving a pretty mediocre growth policy from the consulting firm that did it. And over the course of the last 3 months, between citizen engagement, direct engagement with the planning board, a couple of NGOs providing really detailed critique of the planning document, we're going to come out of this with a really good growth policy. And it would not have happened without the involvement of the NGO community. Whether or not the Beartooth Front Community Forum would want to take on that task, I don't know. But people have a hard time understanding these processes. They don't know when the critical meetings are, and there really needs to be someone that's organizing community engagement, where it's probably not going to happen, but when it does, can really have a significant impact.
Thank you, Dennis and Jeff. We've got a couple more questions in here, so I'll move on to this next one from John Clayton. He says, one of the successes of the 90s was that we could get the community united around small town values and then shift to planning. How do we do that in today's political environment?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that John Clayton would ask the most difficult question of the evening. And I'm going to leave it up to everyone, and that's who he asked it of.
Well, I would just say that small town values are, you know, they really do unite people. And I know that, you know, communities change and evolve, but, you know, most people are here for a lot of the same reasons. And, you know, just reminding them of that and building that shared sense of these, identifying and building a sense of, you know, we all share and appreciate this set of values. I think that's really the foundation for all of this work. So it may be the year 2021 and not the year 1991, but I still think those values are understood and deeply appreciated by people, but we need to remind them of that.
Thanks, Thanks, Dennis. I've got a question from Jeremy Battles. In communities that have, in your estimation, been successful in implementing smart growth planning, are there common tools that those communities use to bring community vision into codified action?
Well, I think that first, I don't know, if I were Red Lodge, if I owned Red Lodge, I would invest in a consulting firm to lead that effort, with direction to have not just a rote, but an actual meaningful, strong community engagement to update your codes. Now, you heard Dennis say just a few minutes ago that their consulting firm in Livingston didn't do a great job, but generally, you know, there are experts out there that do this, and you know, your local planning staff, you know, James is so busy with dealing with all of these day-to-day current planning challenges, and your planning board is, you know, I got full-time lives. I think it's really difficult to do that unless you have like a dedicated long-range planner on staff. So that would be my suggestions. Hire a consulting firm and give them real strong direction that there's going to be meaningful, you know, public engagement.
I've got a question from Tom Coley. What role does the Chamber of Commerce play in smart growth?
Dennis, what would you say?
Well, I think that for one thing, the economics of smart growth that Randy talked about earlier should capture the interest of the Chamber of Commerce, and, you know, maximizing revenues from more compact development and minimizing the fiscal costs of growth by corralling sprawl. I think that's you know, the economic side of smart growth, but also so much of smart growth is just about creating livable, affordable communities and healthy communities. And I've always said that with our chamber in Livingston, I said, don't worry so much about doing things to attract tourists. You know, support things that make this a great place to live and an authentic community. And that's the best advertising that you can do for your town. And, you know, marketing a community is you know, a major role of chambers of commerce. So I would say that, embracing smart growth, doing what they can to help make it a reality is maybe one of the best things they can do to end up with a community that's attracting new businesses and new people.
Thanks, Dennis. I've got just a comment from Steve Simonson that there's a great opportunity for public comment and involvement on April 20th at 9 a.m. in the Carbon County Commissioner's Office for CDBG, that's Community Development Block Grant, issues around public infrastructure, economic development, and housing. And then another comment from James, Planning Board is second and fourth Wednesdays at 5:30. And those are in City Hall and also online via GoToMeeting. I've got a question from Jen Baranovic. I think I said your name right. To those here from Red Lodge City Government, are there any plans to implement any further regulation over vacation rentals? James Caniglia, I think you're on. Would you want to unmute and speak to that?
Yes, thanks, Robin. Yeah, Jen, we actually held about 10 meetings on short-term rentals at the planning board about 2 years ago. My suggestion was that we only allow them above the benches and try and keep the core of town free of new ones. I got beat up pretty bad in those meetings. There wasn't really any support. There was a couple people who spoke in support of it, but the opposition was very overwhelming. And really the only thing we got in the regulations was that they no longer run with the land. So if the problem gets worse and we do regulate them to a greater extent in the future, they will not be able to change hands. But that's where we're at right now.
If I could just throw this out there about short-term rentals, I think a common way that communities address them is to, in residential districts, they must be owner occupied. So you couldn't buy a home and kick out the long-term renters and just turn it exclusively into a short-term rental. You'd have to live there. In commercial districts, you can do anything you want, but a typical thing is to say they have to be owner occupied. And in that case, they can actually increase affordability because now someone who owns a home can rent out their basement or an accessory dwelling unit or something, help them make their mortgage payment.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. And we did speak to that too. And I know that's what Bozeman does. We looked at what Bozeman does, which is that option. We looked at Whitefish, which allows it in certain areas, but not others. And we also looked at models that some towns in Colorado have, which is only a certain percentage of the homes within the community can be short-term rentals. But unfortunately, none of those options gained any traction at that time.
Okay. Thanks, James.
So we're coming up on 6:30 here. So I'll just quickly ask the rest of the questions that are in this chat. So Jeff says that workforce housing is a concern. You recently worked with Gardner in that issue. How did that process go and what was the outcome?
The outcome was that Gardner's an unincorporated community. They literally have no city government. And that means they can literally regulate nothing. The county can, but the county, just doesn't. And it's a long ways from Livingston. So they are moving forward. And there's going to be a meeting on it tonight or tomorrow night, Zoom meeting or next week on what the committee that came out of this effort has come up with. But I believe that's what they've come up with is to pursue sort of a municipality light, a Part 2 zoning district that would allow them to regulate things like short-term rentals and have design standards, et cetera.
Thank you. John Clayton put in a link to the city's Google group. I can also vouch that is a very good group to be a part of to stay updated on zoning regulation updates. And then this will be our last question of the evening. Amy Highfield asks, there is a lot of money coming down from the American Rescue Act. Do you know if there is any money available for long range planning and coordination of county and city planning?
And Robin, it looks like Steve addressed that right below.
Oh yeah, he did. So Steve says, Amy, there's a funding formula that the legislators will be determining. Looks like about twice what came from CARES Act funding. Stay tuned.
And I would add one more thing. Yesterday, and it seems to be a very bipartisan bill, the Housing Supply and Affordability Act was introduced into the Senate. And it looks like that's a very promising thing that will be another big bunch of money for housing, for local government, for local communities. So stay on top of that.
Amy, do you want to take over and close this out?
Yes, I do. Give me 1 second. Gotta switch over. Thanks everyone for joining. Did want to just take a moment to remind you that if you are interested in a little bit more information about growth and would like to take part in Futures West educational webinar series, the next one is on April 14th. You can go to their website for more information. And then we hope that you will join us at our next webinar, which will be April 29th, also at 5:30 in the evening. We'll be talking about taxpayer-supported infrastructure. Right now, we currently have Tom Coley and Bill Bullock and Ken Coffin speaking about that topic. If you do have any questions, you can contact me or Jeff or Robin or James or anybody else that's on the Beartooth Front Community Forum Steering Committee. And also find more information at our website, which is beartoothfront.org. I want to say thank you very much to both Randy and Dennis. This was a really engaging conversation. We will have a recording of this on our website as soon as I can get it on. And if there were any questions that were not addressed that were in the chat, we'll try to get back to you and get those answered as soon as we can. So I guess with that, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Dennis. Did you have one more thing you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Jeff, Amy, and Robin for the invitation again. It was a real treat to be with you. And for all those that are viewing and have been involved in the Beartooth Front Community Forum, again, our heartfelt thanks for what you've done for Red Lodge and for the region for the past 30 years, and that I trust you will keep doing for the next 30 years. So thank you all.
All right, everybody, thanks for attending, and we will see you at our next webinar on April 29th. Take good care.
See you.
We'll see you.